Hello and welcome back to World War II Notes. Today we're going to be talking about important battles and also American involvement, the war on the home front. So, got a lot to cover. Let's get started. So, some important battles that happened were the Battle of Britain, Operation Barbarossa, Operation Overlord, and Battle of the Bulge. You don't need to necessarily know all of these. I'm just giving you background. I figure I should at least mention these, especially, you know, Operation Overlord is D-Day, which I feel like is pretty important to mention. So just some background. So Battle of Britain, after Hitler has taken control of the rest of Western Europe, they turn to their focus on Great Britain. So the English Channel is the only thing that separates the German military from controlling Great Britain. So excellent for them that they are an island country at this point in history. So England's Prime Minister, who is Winston Churchill at this point in time, prepares England for attacks from the air by the Germans. Around 1,000 planes a day conduct bombing raids on Britain during this time when Germany is trying to take over Great Britain, make them give in. So the British Royal Air Force is outnumbered by the number of planes that Germany has at this point, but they fly multiple missions a day to kind of inflict damage on the German Air Force. And by the end of 1941, the British had regained control of the skies over England. So this is referred to as the Battle of Britain, just Germany constantly bombing Britain for a very long period of time until England can kind of fend them off. So that's the Battle of Britain. Operation Barbarossa is Hitler's attack on the USSR. So June 22nd, 1941, Hitler launches an attack on the USSR, which is kind of two-faced because he is supposed to be allies with them. So it's called Operation Barbarossa. Initially, it goes super well for the Germans, and they end up taking over Moscow, while the Soviets retreat to Stalingrad, another city. However, Germany is not prepared for a Russian winter, and when Russian reinforcements arrive, German soldiers are sent packing. Out of the 250,000 troops that Germany sends out on the mission, only 6,000 return to Germany because so many die from the brutal Russian winters that they are not prepared for at all. So pretty crazy. Thanks, Mother Nature, for Operation Barbarossa's failure. Operation Overlord takes place June 6, 1944. The Allies launched this operation. This is what D-Day is. So the initial assault takes place on a 60-mile stretch of French coast in Normandy. The D-Day assault is coordinated by General Eisenhower, go America, and utilizes 175,000 men, 600 warships, and 11,000 planes. So Germany had fortified the coast of Normandy with machine guns. They had lined the coast with barbed wire, land mines, water mines, and underwater obstructions so that ships couldn't come as close. And there were many casualties during Operation Overlord, but it brought a large number of Allied troops onto the mainland, which allows them to eventually liberate Paris from the Germans by August. So it takes them like a couple months to liberate Paris after this operation. So the Allies continue to push German forces back after D-Day, and they end up winning Belgium and Holland back by September. So Operation Overlord is super important. D-Day is super important because it allows the Allies to get their foot on the ground and take all of this territory back from Germany. So it's a real turning point. Battle of the Bulge is our last one we're going to talk about. So as the Allies continue to push the German army back, into their own area, the Nazis were running out of troops, and they began to receive reinforcements who were as young as 15. So Germany enters into an offensive campaign because they don't want to risk losing more soldiers with the Battle of the Bulge. So the Germans in this battle were trying to split the Allied line and give them no choice but to sign a peace treaty with Germany, and it did not succeed. So there were 81,000 American casualties in this battle and 100,000 German casualties. And by March of 1945, the Allied troops had crossed the Rhine River and marched on Berlin from the west, and Soviets advanced on Berlin from the east. So this was pretty much the end of the war. And then just briefly, some military technology that's being used in World War II. So Blitzkrieg means lightning war, which is what they use a lot in World War II, just quickly attacking and it being over very fast. Aircraft carriers are replacing battleships during this war because they have greater range, greater striking power, and the ability to carry aircrafts. So planes are a super huge part of World War II. And then aircrafts are developed even further to be efficient bombing machines. So if you remember in World War I, we start using airplanes to drop bombs on people. It becomes more advanced, more accurate in World War II. So they use that a lot. And then also we start using our scientific abilities to start working on the atomic bomb during this period. In the US, it's called the Manhattan Project. We end up developing the atomic bomb during this time period, and we use it at the end of the war. Napalm is also developed. Guided missiles are used during World War II. And we have all these technological breaks in communication. So we have electronics that are specifically dedicated to breaking codes sent by our enemies. So very important for obtaining intelligence from the different countries. So, whoops. Okay, so here's our American involvement. So we don't actually enter the war really until 1941, but it kind of kicks off in 1939. So we have the Neutrality Act in 1939, which basically says Britain and France can purchase weapons from us if they pay cash up front for those weapons. So in 1939, we're just trying to benefit economically from the war. We do not want to get involved at this point. We are still going through it from the Great Depression. 1941 is the Lend-Lease Act. We passed the Lend-Lease Act. So this basically allows Britain to receive supplies from the US without paying up front. So we are lending or leasing items to Great Britain for the war effort, but we are still trying to stay uninvolved in this war. October in 1941, America approves the need for a draft. So in the 1930s and 40s, America still is supporting that isolationist policy and only has 200,000 men in military service in 1939. And then by 1945, 1.8 million men are serving in the US military. So this is really where the US military takes off. So that's what they need the draft for. They're just preparing in case we inevitably need to get involved in the war. So December 7th, 1941, the Pearl Harbor attack happens. Japan drops bombs on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So obviously we need to retaliate as the strongest country in the world. So December 8th, literally the next day, the US declares war on Japan. And as Japan is an ally with Germany and Italy, December 11th, 1941, Germany and Italy declare war on the US. So then we get involved in the whole World War. All right, so war at home. As the US kind of enters the war in 1941, the peacetime factories are converted into producing things for the war, like tanks, guns, planes, all of the good stuff that you need to fight in battles. So people are encouraged by celebrities to buy war bonds that will help the government pay for the war. And just like in the last unit, bonds are an investment. You pay a certain amount up front, and then they're expected to increase in value over time as you hold on to them. So people start rationing food and supplies as well. Metal that is originally being used to produce zippers and typewriters goes into producing guns. Nylon for stockings gets used for parachutes, so women stop wearing nylons at this point in time. Suits don't get produced with vests anymore, and women's skirts get shorter and tighter to save on fabric. So it's affecting even our fashion at home, our cultural stuff going on at home. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter, canned fruit, shoes, and gas are all rationed as well. Citizens start planning what they call victory gardens to kind of self-sufficiently produce food for their families. And they eventually produce a third of America's fresh veggies. So very effective victory gardens. And then with so many men away fighting, women are encouraged to take their spots during the war, and many women join the workforce. And they're encouraged to do so with the propaganda of Rosie the Riveter, who I'm sure you've all seen before. She's just a character that was created to represent a strong female trying to do her part for the war effort by taking over a factory job. She says, "We can do it." Very cool lady. So after the Pearl Harbor attacks in 1941, this is a whole separate, sorry. So we're at home, we're doing all of this stuff to kind of contribute to the war effort. And then the Japanese American internment camps are kind of a separate thing altogether. So after the Pearl Harbor attacks in 1941, many Americans grow very resentful and hostile towards Japanese Americans because they think that they are spies for the Japanese. So we're basically just looking for a scapegoat at this point. So in February of 1942, President Roosevelt signs Executive Order 9066, which creates military zones on the West Coast, which is where most Japanese Americans live because they've come over from Japan, and the West Coast is closer geographically to Japan. So he authorizes the removal of people from these military zones that he's created. So Japanese Americans are targeted for this removal specifically, and about 110,000 of them are moved into internment camps in America. Isn't that crazy? So many of these families lose their businesses, their homes, property. They're only allowed to bring like a couple bags at a time. They're not given time to kind of settle their affairs. They lose a ton of money and things like that. So they're kept in these internment camps until 1945. And then it took until the 1980s for the American government to apologize for this and give surviving people who are still living $20,000 in a tax-free payment as like reparations for what we did during World War II. And then it's also worthy to note that even though this is happening at home with the Japanese internment camps, more than 20,000 Japanese Americans are serving in the military during World War II. At the same time, this is happening at home. And one of the regiments that was made up entirely of Japanese Americans won more medals for bravery than any other unit in U.S. history for any war. So it's pretty crazy what's going on during this time period. And that is it. for this notes video. Please join me next time to talk about the end of the war. Good day.